Well, thank you very much for that warm welcome. I appreciate it. To my great friend, Rod Hamilton, who came for this event. His roots are here, his family is here, and I'm very, very grateful to him for his friendship. We need people in public office who have the right heart, but also that their heart and their heads are connected, that their compass settings are to true north. And in Rod Hamilton, Minnesota has been well represented in our Minnesota legislature by him. But Humboldt County, Iowa should be proud of him as well, because I know where he comes from. He's done a great job in public service. He's a great leader. Let's give him a round of applause as well. Now, I wish my wife Mary could be with us tonight. She's coming in tomorrow. She was campaigning with me all across Iowa last week, and she'll be with us the rest of this week as well. But she can't be on every trip, everywhere, every day, because we have two teenage daughters at home. One of them is 18, Anna. One of them is 15, Mara. One of them drives, and they both like boys, and so they need some parental supervision. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? But, of course, one of the great opportunities that we've had as husband and wife is have two beautiful daughters, and of course you learn a lot interacting with them and their friends. And I had a great experience when I first started running for governor back in Minnesota. I'm here to get acquainted with you tonight, but I wasn't well known back then. I didn't have a lot of money, and a lot of the experts didn't think I had much of a chance. So on one of the early days of my campaign, I did this fly around across Minnesota in a little two-seater plane, and not many people showed up at the stops. Literally, there's like 3 people at a number of the stops. One was the airport manager, some guy trying to get something out of the vending machine, and then maybe one reporter. And I was kind of discouraged in the early days of the campaign, but I came home one night after doing that and took off my suit, put on my youth soccer coach's jersey. I was the head coach of one of the girls' soccer teams that summer and fall, so I had on this jersey, my clipboard, my whistle, and walked out into the field feeling kind of down about how my campaign got off to kind of a slow start. And then these little girls, these 6- and 7-year-old girls, came running up to me. They were very excited, and they said, "Are you running for governor? Are you running for governor?" And I thought, wow, my campaigning is really working. I've only been at this a day or two, and my message has permeated the brains of these 6- and 7-year-old girls. This is powerful stuff. And so I kind of pridefully puffed up. I said, "Yeah, I'm running for governor." And this one girl, Kelly, I'll never forget, she looked right at me and she said, "Cool." She said, "Do you think you could get me Jesse Ventura's autograph?" So I'm familiar with the role of getting acquainted with new people who I hope will be our supporters in our campaign. And I think if somebody comes before you and says they want to be President of the United States, a good place to start is to have them tell you where they come from, who they are, how they were raised, what they believe, what that informs you about their values and their worldview and their life perspective. My background is no better or no worse than anyone else's, but I think it's informative to share with people if you want to be President of the United States. So you should know I grew up in a meatpacking town right outside of St. Paul, South St. Paul, Minnesota, a relatively small first-ring suburb, but back in the day it was home to some of the world's largest meatpacking plants and world's largest stockyards, 5-, 6-story, huge processing plants surrounded by some of the world's stockyards. So you can imagine a relatively small town dominated by these mammoth meatpacking plants, and millions of animals a year would go through there, and you can imagine in the 1960s the sights and sounds and smells of all of that in a hometown. And of course, those big plants shut down pretty suddenly back in the 60s and 70s. So at a young age, I saw the face of job loss. I saw the face of moms and dads and others in my neighborhood and community facing an uncertain future, having a lot of worry about whether they were going to be able to take care of their families, whether they were going to be able to meet their family's needs and obligations. And then, of course, in my own family, we had some hardship. My mom got ovarian cancer and died when I was 16 years old. My dad was a truck driver for much of his life. Later in life, he got promoted to terminal manager. We thought we'd hit the jackpot in our family. By the way, my first paycheck out of college was a little bigger than his last paycheck when he retired, so it was a bittersweet moment when we compared those two first experiences. But not too long after my mom died, my dad lost his job for a while. And I share that with you because it's informative about some experiences I've had. And when you're young and your mom has passed on and your dad's unemployed, you get to see some things in life pretty early. You get to make some decisions about what you believe and why. And so I learned in those moments of challenge and in all moments of challenge to lean into my faith. It deepened tremendously. I learned about the value of a loving family rallying around me at a time of big challenge and big crisis in my family. I learned about the value of a job. One day the phone rang and it was one of the folks who ran the produce department at the local grocery store, and he said, "Hey, I heard about your family's plight. You show up here Saturday morning and you got yourself a job, and at 6 a.m. show up here." And I worked in that grocery store for the next 7 years or so, through high school, through college, and even into law school. Learned the value of a job and what that means to stabilizing somebody's finances and giving you a hopeful outlook for the future. And I learned about the value of education, what that means to open doors for young people in the next generation, how important that is if you're going to be able to have the American dream. And when my mom was dying, not long before she passed on, she called my brothers and sisters into her hospital room, and she called them around her bed. She didn't invite me. She wanted them to promise because she knew she wasn't going to be there much longer. She said that none of her kids had been able to get through school and get on to college. She made my brothers and sisters look her in the eye and promise her that they'd do everything they could to get me through school and on to college. And they did, within the best of their abilities. They weren't able to go to college. I was the first one in my family to be able to go and complete college, not because my brothers and sisters didn't have the capacity. They just didn't have the opportunity. I share that with you because when people talk about the American dream, they talk about what it means to think about the importance of jobs, when they talk about what it means to experience faith in a moment of hardship in life, when they talk about what it means to have a loving family and the important cornerstone that that plays in our society. For me, that's not a spreadsheet. It's not a debate. It's not a bunch of numbers. It's not a budget. For me, that's my life. I've lived the American dream. I know it. And so I love this country. And I know you do too. And I'm running for President of the United States because I've got the leadership, the executive experience, the record of results, and the ideas and the values and the strength to lead it to a better place. Now we got some challenges. And we got to understand what this country's facing, because it is the hours later than people realize. So when you think about how we got into this mess, before we talk about how we get out of it, let's remember how we got into it. One of the ways we got into it is because a very fancy talking candidate for President of the United States came through Iowa 4 or so years ago. His name was Barack Obama. And he had soaring speeches. He had really great rhetoric. I mean, the words were incredible. Some of you, at least maybe if not on the content, at least in the rhetoric, perhaps were even interested in what he had to say. And he duped the Democrats in this state to catapult him towards the presidency of the United States. What do we learn from that? Well, one of the things we better learn from it is before you put somebody in the Oval Office and make him or her the President of the United States and the leader of this country and the Commander-in-Chief and the leader of the free world, they better be ready for the job. They better be ready for the job. And so this is a person who was a community organizer. This is a person who was a college professor, a lecturer. This is a person who was in the United States Senate long enough to have a cup of coffee before it got cold, and then we put him in the Oval Office. And we wonder why it's not working. He wasn't ready for the job. So that's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is this. We got to have somebody as the right direction and ideas for the country. Barack Obama doesn't have an economic plan. All he has is a campaign plan. Barack Obama is somebody who believes the way forward is to grow more and more government, to have government take over more of our lives, more of our economy. He wants to take things from the private sector and move it into government. We want to take things from government and put it back in the private sector. And if we're going to have a new and better direction for America, we need a new and better president. Now look, you can almost stick a fork in him. I think he's about done politically. His numbers nationally are bad. You look at his numbers in the swing states that are really going to decide the election, like Iowa amongst independents, his numbers are awful. Well, he's got some other things to account for, though. One of which is he broke all his promises. This is the third lesson. If we're going to have a better promise for America and restore America's promise, we need a president who's going to keep his or her promise to America. Now, I won't go through them all because we'd be here all night if we went through all of his broken promises, but let me give you a few by way of example. When he came into the Oval Office and became president of this great nation, in March of 2009, after he knew the full downfall of the economy, he looked us in the eye, the American people, and he said, in my first term, I'll cut the budget deficit in half. So when George Bush left the office, the budget deficit was $500 billion or so. Barack Obama didn't cut it in half. Barack Obama tripled it. It's $1.5 trillion as we're gathered here tonight. Here's a couple more. He comes through Iowa and talks about health care and says, you know, the health care costs are out of reach for too many people. That's right. That's the right diagnosis of the problem. And then he said he would focus on cost containment. He said he would do health care reform with Republicans. He said he was against the individual mandate as a candidate. And then he went to Washington, D.C. and broke every one of those promises. He stiff-armed the Republicans. He didn't focus on cost containment. All he did is try to expand an already broken system. And then he put forward an unconstitutional individual mandate. And again, broke his word. Now just one more. Of course, we had an economic problem. He spends the first year and a half of his presidency chasing issues like health care, an unconstitutional health care plan, and things like how do you close down Guantanamo. He wanted to close down Guantanamo so he could bring suspected terrorists back to American soil when he should have been focused on the economy. Then he says, well, gosh, to get the economy moving, I guess what we need to do is pass this stimulus bill. Remember that? And he said, if you don't pass the stimulus bill, unemployment could go all the way to 8%. 8%. They passed that pork-filled governance, sustenance, waste of money, and unemployment didn't go to 8%. It went to 10%. So I don't know about you, but I had it with Barack Obama. I've had it with his empty rhetoric. He didn't deliver on any of his promises. He's got the country headed in a wrong and dangerous direction. And his words, his rhetoric, his speeches don't fill up our gas tank. Barack Obama's rhetoric and words don't pay our mortgage. Barack Obama's rhetoric doesn't pay our health care insurance. Barack Obama's rhetoric isn't going to put these kids through college in terms of their parents' ability. So I've had enough. And I hope you had too. Yeah.